I want to hand it off to Daniel and just, give you the floor. First off, introduce yourself a little bit, describe people a little bit your journey to your founding of Kronos, and give people your bona fides around working in the industrial sector because it's extensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me on, and glad to share with everybody who's on. And, we can take this conversation really any direction. So I'm glad you're going to jump in with any kind of questions or tactical or whatever, because I am not married to the content that I put into the slides. So we can take it any direction. I think I've got probably 30-ish, maybe 40 minutes of content. So we have a lot of time at the end if we want to take it any direction we want. But that being said, as Matt mentioned, my name's Daniel. I am a marketing practitioner through and through. I definitely, even though I have an agency today, I still identify very much as a marketing practitioner. I spent my career leading up to Kronos. Basically, I got lucky. I got hired basically 5 times over to start demand generation for a company. So my first job out of college as an undergrad, I got hired by the CEO to start demand generation. Then I got recruited by another company and their CEO to do demand generation, and then it happened again, and then it happened again. So I spent, the 10-ish, little more than 10 years, basically starting up demand generation, and along the way, hiring the staff and building the processes and buying the technology and all that good stuff. And it got progressively bigger and bigger. It kind of peaked at about 35 people on the team, and then I went a different direction and worked for a startup and basically started all over by myself and no team, and that was kind of an interesting experience. And so, I guess fast forward 11 years on that, and I took that experience and basically created Kronos, where what we do today is help people start up demand generation, and we do it with a very account-based lens, if you will. But I really just think about it as efficient demand generation. And speaking to the industrial side of it, so in my career, basically, I grew up at Danaher, a big manufacturing conglomerate, if you will. And it's very based around lean and business systems and standard work and all that. And I took that to Acuity, which is also a big lighting manufacturer. And they also are built on lean business processes and business systems and things like that. So really, if you're familiar with ABM at all and lean, they kind of go hand in hand. You're trying to cost out, lean out waste in the process. And that is really a lot of how I think about ABM. So that's my background. And today I run ABM programs or build and orchestrate ABM programs for a wide variety of businesses across a wide variety of verticals. So there's a lot of context there. So that's enough about me. I don't know, Matt, anything you want to say before I jump in on the content, or?
All I would say is, again, guys, have any questions, just drop them in. Daniel's really going to talk about this at a high level, and then we're going to get a little bit into okay, now that I know the theory of ABM and this team framework that you're going to walk us through, how do I actually go about executing on it? And then we'll jump in with some feedback as well. But really, if you see something, say something when it comes to, can you expand on this, clarify on this? Here's my use case. How would you go about approaching that? We're definitely here to give you that kind of feedback loop on your program, no matter how nascent or long you've been doing it for.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Yeah, I will say that I did build this conversation around people who are probably early on the maturity cycle, but that doesn't mean we can't take it wherever we want to take it. So, so that being said, I really like to start the conversation with just saying, hey, what is ABM? And I'm sure if you're here, you may have Googled ABM before, and there's like 100 different answers, and some people call it ABX, and some people call it ABSM, and there's all these different acronyms for it. And so I like to just kind of start with, I think about it as a strategy. It is a go-to-market approach. It's how you build your teams. It's how you build your content plan. It's how you build your tech stack. I mean, it is definitely a strategy. That's not to say that there aren't tactics that you can deploy and a tactical approach to it. But when you're really scaling up ABM, it is a strategic thing. And it does shape the way you think about staffing and building your stack and all that good stuff. The second thing I like to really call out is personalized. And, a lot of people will say, well, I've been doing account-based marketing forever, or I've been personalizing my content forever. So how's this different? And the biggest difference, in my opinion, is the degree to which you can do that and the scale at which you can do it. And personalization for me really just translates into relevancy. Is how can I make my outreach as relevant as possible to the person I'm reaching out to, and doing that at scale. And so with ABM and the tech that's in the market today, a lot of it is either aimed at personalized outreach or measuring it. It's like that's what most of that technology is doing. And we're going to talk more about that. The marketing and sales highlight here, I think this definition has evolved a little bit, and usually people are also including like customer success or service or other elements. But the main thing from the highlight is that even though it's called ABM for marketing, it is not a marketing thing. You know, I like, if you really want to get nerdy on it, I think the reason why it's called ABM is the same reason why product marketing is called product marketing. Like they're just as much an engineer as they are sales, as they are a marketer. It's just kind of where it all crosses over. And so that's kind of where my mind goes on it. ABM is kind of like product marketing in that you got to be talking to a lot of different people internally and externally to really build a good product or build a good ABM strategy. So anyway, marketing and sales working together is super important, because at the end of the day, if you're going to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, you better put them in the right basket. And you can't do that if you're not aligned. So you're trying to align your sales and marketing efforts and then open doors and deepen engagement at specific accounts. And that is, a lot of people go to ABM for net new acquisition, like new logos, basically. But more and more, and this is kind of old news at this point, there's a lot of pipeline acceleration, customer lifecycle marketing, like renewal marketing. There's a lot that you can do even after you've closed the deal at the account using account-based marketing. So each piece of this we're going to talk about a little bit as we get into it. And you can tell this definition is a little old because I'm citing Digio, but I really like that one.
Yeah. Couple follow-ups I have. I have a couple of questions for you based on that first slide that I'll get into. But I always think of account-based marketing. If you go way back, I mean, it's what key accounts teams are by and large in a lot of industrial companies. A lot of companies have key accounts teams, and they really are doing a form of account-based sales or account-based marketing. And so it has, like you said, net new, but also just expansion upon some of those accounts. If you offer a lot of different products, you can certainly use ABM as a sort of land and expand model. I had a question for you about, you said, your tech stack is different, how you hire is different when you're running ABM. And I'm wondering if you could speak to either of those two things. If you have that covered later in the presentation, we can certainly park it till then, but I'm definitely curious about your take on those two.
No, I'm happy to. I have found when you talk to ABM marketers who've been doing it a long time and they're at a fairly mature point, you start running into, do I need marketing automation?
Yeah.
Or do I really want to spend my money on marketing automation? This is an example, just one example to kind of peel back. And, I've kind of arrived at that question before as well. Like once upon a time, Marketo quoted me $980,000 for a Marketo contract. And there's a lot of context there, but it was a big investment. And, I'm not saying market automation is not relevant. I'm just saying when I started at Phononic, a startup, I came into that startup and we had to generate demand. We had no data, we had no systems, we had no understanding of the market. We had a new product. It was a startup. What are we going to do? Well, if you don't have an existing database to market to, what are you going to do with your marketing automation platform? I mean, sure, you can build an inbound program. You can start growing a list. You can even go buy data and start putting that in and running it. But if you don't know who you should be targeting and you don't have any data and you're trying to figure that out, you can't really do that with marketing automation, but you can do that with ABM ad tech as an example. And so, some of this tech out there like ABM ad tech, like a Terminus or a Demandbase or Rollworks or something like that, where you can cycle through large swaths of target accounts across set verticals and personas and figure out where your message is resonating before you double down on a particular vertical. As an example, you find that I actually need Terminus more than I need Marketo on day one. Now, you can't really do one without the other, but that's where you start making decisions like, do I spend more money on the premium this system or the premium that system? And so you start just, or like a sales law or an outreach, and you're trying to activate the sales team. If you're running traditional demand gen, you might spend more of your money on a Marketo than on a sales loft. I mean, it's very dependent on where you are, but that's part of it. And I think marketers for a long time were getting sold a lot of technology, and a lot of that technology didn't work together.
Yeah.
So a lot of the technology has been focusing on like coming together into a smaller set of technology. And if money is no object and it's really about time, like of just getting to market as fast as possible, you want a streamlined stack so that you can move fast and you don't have problems. So that's I know that's kind of a broad answer, but like to get some color around the technology, it just changes what you prioritize based on how you're going to market. And ad tech versus market automation is a good example of that. But even like buying a data provider or something like that, you might, or an intent data provider, which will come up in the conversation later. As far as the stack goes, I think that you can absolutely take a traditional demand gen marketer or a traditional ad ops person and evolve them into an ABM marketer, and a lot of people have done that. But at this point, the technology's been around for 5 years. If you were hiring a marketing technologist today to run an ABM program, well, let me back up. 5 years ago, if you were hiring a marketing technologist, you would have been looking for somebody who's really good with marketing automation. Probably still looking for that today, but you're also probably, if you're going to go ABM, looking for somebody who's really good with ad tech. And if you had to pick, well, does this person know my ABM tech, or do they know my marketing automation tech? That answer to that question might be different depending on how you're staffing the team and how many hires you can make and what strategy you're going to deploy. So the skill sets have changed a little bit, and the technology experience has changed a little bit as well. And it doesn't always translate perfectly from what people have done before. So there's a massive skills gap in the market for ABM marketers. I know this firsthand.
Yeah.
And it's from that, as far as
Do you think the skills gap, we're going to answer this, so let's not, I'm going to leave it as a cliffhanger and think about it as we get farther in. Do you think the skills gap in account-based marketing is more so people just not knowing how to execute on it because they don't know how to think about it strategically, or is there just a lack of raw skills among ABM practitioners that just needs developing? I guess.
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question, and I hope nobody nails me for this one. I think especially in industrial marketing, a good demand gen marketer needs to have a lot of empathy for the sales team, for the customer, for
engineering,
internal, because you got to get all these people together to get what you need, and you just can't do it in a silo. You just can't. Like, you can try, but you can't. And unfortunately for the marketer, a lot of times that means the marketer has to take a step back and be humble in the conversation, because the sales org owns the customer or owns the revenue target or whatever. And you just can't get over that hurdle if you're not connecting with your sales partners or whoever it is, whatever stakeholder, empathizing with whatever their problems are, and then building your strategy to help in part solve those problems. And I do think there's a technology, like, do you have experience with this technology? But there's also, do you have the soft skills or even the patience to deal with some of that, because it is, I think maybe I'm reaching too far back. I remember back in the days of having to work with IT to get my website working. Well, a lot of times today with your website, you don't even need IT anymore. It's a totally different thing, right? It's like, so anyway, it's just a different set of people that you have to build these relationships with. It's a different set of just, I don't know, how you think about it and the problems you're going to run into and how you approach solving them and how you build those relationships. So I think it's one part soft skills, it's one part technology skills, but any good demand generator can learn the technology, don't get me wrong. And then, and then it comes down to, some people have a hard time getting over the hurdle of, well, I'm used to measuring MQLs, and with ABM, like a mature ABM program, it's not uncommon that the MQL metric dies totally.
Yeah, because the MQL is going into it. It's like, look, we know who we're going after. They're all market qualified at this point. And I'm going to get into the team framework, because basically that's what you're doing. You're setting your marketing qualified, and then that point is moving them into book calls.
Yeah. So hopefully that gives you some context, and we can come back to that as well. And again, like, this is my opinion on it, but that's just from some of my exposure to it. So I'm gonna glaze over the next slide for the sake of speed. this slide is about why ABM, and I'm going to hit them really fast for the sake of it. But one, basically everybody says when you run an ABM strategy, you get a better ROI. Two, usually most people find a lift in win rate when they're running ABM, and it's a significant lift in win rate. And I'll come back to these. Three, most people find the cost per acquisition of the new account that you're closed into the funnel is cheaper, it's less expensive. And four, most marketers today, according to Forrester anyway, will tell you that ABM is a central part of B2B marketing. So combine these together, and basically, if you are honing your marketing to focus on very specific set of accounts and very specific people with very specific messaging, you are probably going to get a better ROI. You're probably going to close more of the deals, and you're probably going to do it for a little in than the alternative approach. And most it's been around long enough, and enough people had success with it that most marketers agree on that. So that's basically what this slide is about. But to move on from that though, and spend a little bit more time on this, I like this slide to talk about the difference between traditional demand gen and ABM. And I like to use a trade show analogy. And so if you're looking at the top of the funnel, and before I even go there, absolutely demand gen can run alongside ABM. You do not need to be exclusively one or the other. You can have a legitimate demand gen strategy running alongside a legitimate ABM strategy. I will say that I have run ABM exclusively for a little over a year when I was at Phononic, and I learned a lot from that, but you don't have to run them exclusively. So, and I think some of that will come out as I speak to this. So using the trade show analogy, because we're all marketers here, or maybe we're not all marketers here, but
we're all marketers here.
Using the trade show analogy, traditional demand gen is a lot like a trade show. You show up at that trade show, and everybody in that hall is somehow related to your industry, and arguably somehow, at least a couple of dots, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon style, connected to your company. And that's traditional demand gen. The world is out there. There's these people in it, and if you can get them in the trade show hall, that's your audience. And once they're in there, some number of them are walking past your booth. Some number of them are going to come into your booth. Some number of them are going to get scanned. Some number of them are going to go to sales. Some number of them sales actually cares about and will call back. And some number of them turn into opportunity, and bam, there's your pipeline. And that analogy of the trade show, it's kind of like inbound marketing on your website or even paid SEM. It's not uncommon. You cast a wide net against a relevant audience, and you sift out, what you want from it. And that's traditional demand generation. Totally viable. There's nothing wrong with it. A lot of people are very good at that. With ABM, you turn it around and you say, in that same trade show hall, what if you already knew everybody that sales at the end of the day was going to call back, and you only put the booth up for the people that sales was going to call back, and everyone you scanned was somebody that you already knew sales wanted to talk to, and like the whole trade show was only the people sales wanted to talk to. That's essentially what you're doing with ABM. You're trying to carve out that audience. These are the accounts that I already know I want to win. These are the people at that account I already know I want to get into my pipeline. Now, how do I get them into my pipeline? And so that's why the MQL metric dies. Because if you've done a good job on your homework of who do I want to convert, you already have the list of the people you want to convert. You got them from ZoomInfo or from Sales Navigator or from your niche data provider. Shout out to IBC Connect, who I use all the time. But you know who you want to convert. And so, and then it's about orchestrating the campaign to convert those people. So that's the difference between ABM and traditional demand generation. So moving on from that then, and if there's any questions, let me know.
Yep.
So the framework that we're going to talk through that Matt mentioned is the team framework and target, engage, activate, measure. This is something that Sangram Badre came up with at Terminus, or at least him and his team did. So I didn't make this up, but this is the framework we're going to talk through. So target, how do I come up with who I should be targeting, and how do I hone the focus of my marketing to the best fit accounts? Once I've done that and honed my focus, what do I get? What do I need to go say to those accounts and those people at those accounts? And what am I going to say? What do I need to say? What should I say to pull them into the buying process? So that's engaged. And then now you've done that, you've engaged all those accounts and those people. Who do I have sales call first? And why? That's essentially what you're trying to do with Activate is you've got that list of accounts, you've got that list of people. You need to start generating your opportunities. which one on the list is the best, the next best one. That's what you're trying to do with activate. And measure is only at the end because it spells team, but really you're measuring along the way and you're trying to understand how can I make this program more effective and more efficient. So that's the framework. And now I'm going to kind of switch over to a whiteboard and actually spell it out for you guys.
Yeah, it's really easy to spell. It's TAM. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. So I did put a screenshot of what I'm about to do into the deck for post this thing. So here, can you see the whiteboard?
I can.
Okay, great.
Okay,
So,
if you all can see the whiteboard, just put 1 in the chat. If you can't, put 0. Now we'll see if we can help you out here.
Okay, perfect.
There we go. All right, we're good.
All right, so target, engage, activate, measure. What does that mean? So target is kind of your who should I be targeting and why should I be targeting them? And in traditional demand generation, you might be thinking about that as like a TAM, TA, or like a total addressable market, or sometimes you see it as like a SAM, serviceable market. I promise I can write. And that's what you're usually thinking about when you're thinking about target. And in ABM land, you tend to hear it referred to as ICP, or ideal customer profile. And so, so ideal customer profile is what you start out with, and I'm going to spend some more time talking about that. But maybe you're looking at your firmographics, like it's got this much revenue or this many employees, or maybe you're looking at geographics or psychographics or whatever you're looking at, but saying, okay, what is my ICP, and how many of them are there? And so you're doing that. That really, this is one of the components that often gets overlooked by people who are gunning to get started, and it often gets devalued in the process, frankly. But it is super important that you've thought through what is the ICP and why is it the ICP, because whoever you put on this list, let's say you've got 500 accounts on this list that meet this ICP criteria, that's where you're going to go put all your time. So don't shortcut ICP. Like, most definitely think critically about that. But at the same
that's the most overlooked part of like the target framework is like, presidents or CEOs wanting to be on, get in every large enterprise level manufacturing account when they probably would be better fits for, mid-sized. Like just a lack of definition around ICP and just wanting to kind of be everywhere.
Yeah, well, there's two problems. There's that problem, lack of definition, and then there's I spent 5 months figuring out my ICP problem, which happens like the worst offender that I ran across, not naming any names, is they put in the tech, they built the program. It took them more than the first year to align on who they were even going to target in the first place. That was the worst offender, and they had already bought the tech. So, so what I mean with that, the moral of that story is, don't let perfect get in the way of better. Like, do get started, but do put time into it. So we're gonna come back to this concept, but you got your ICP. This is my who and my why. Who am I targeting and why? And let's say it's 500 for the sake of this conversation. So now I've got my ICP, and so now I'm thinking about, well, what am I going to say to them, and where am I going to say it? And so, this is things like channels and content and stuff like that. So as I'm doing that, I'm really trying to take my prospects out there and move them down the journey into becoming a customer, basically. And so in this engage section of the framework, I tend to start the conversation with this idea of passive engagement. And this is where it starts to get a little different from traditional demand gen. So let me just write this out, passive engagement. And then I would be doing this, if it was me, with ad technology to be specific, but there's a couple of ways to do it, and I'll speak to that. So passively, these accounts that you want to target, and you start measuring passively at the account level, how many impressions maybe did I get, or how many clicks did I get, or if you're not doing ad tech, maybe you're measuring how many visits to my website did I get, or whatever the case, you're measuring at the account level, anonymous, I'm just going to abbreviate that as anonymous people, but at the account level. And you're measuring this, and you're trying to drive this level of engagement up, however you measure that. And I'm going to come back to that, because ultimately you're trying to achieve this threshold of engagement. And so as you're achieving this threshold of engagement, oftentimes in the beginning, let's say you have no data, no history, maybe it's a time-based thing, and you're running for a period of time, just trying to raise the tide of awareness or raise the tide of engagement at the account. So you've got maybe a time base, and over time, it becomes more score-based, and I'm going to come back to that. But time and score, whatever the case, you're trying to drive up this passive engagement. I'm going to spend some more time on that. And ultimately, as you're hitting this threshold of engagement, you're getting to this idea of a marketing qualified account.
Yeah.
And the marketing qualified account means that you've hit some appreciable level of engagement at the account that says this account is now an account worth my time, worth my salespeople's time, really, because we're in Activate. And so over here in Activate, we're thinking about the priority of the outreach. Priority of the outreach that you want to do, basically, is what you're doing here. And so you've got these MQAs, marketing qualified accounts. And from those marketing qualified accounts, maybe you're looking for your sales ready leads, which might be like a discovery call. So I'm just going to say disco call, but maybe it's a demo call, or promise I can write. But you've got these sales ready leads, and then from a sales ready lead, and this is just a framework. You maybe have your sales accepted leads. That might translate into something like a SQL. If you think about sales qualified lead, often it translates into like an opportunity that you're generating, and you're trying to win these opportunities. Whoops, I promise I can write. So you're trying to win these opportunities, or whatever the case. So you've got these MQAs that you're hitting. Another analogy, because I love my analogies that I like to use here, is this is the pond from which you want your BDRs or your sales team to go fish. That's ultimately what the MQA pool is. And so as you're doing that, now you're going to start measuring, and there's two categories of measurement that I want to talk about: reporting and optimization. And so as you are generating these MQAs and you're trying to report on what you have, and I have an example of this in the deck on a couple of slides, you're getting into things like dashboards. So maybe you're building a dashboard that represents that pond from which you want your BDRs or your sales team to go fishing. I'm going to come back to that. But you're building this dashboard, and two, alongside that, you're using that dashboard and this process to create the feedback loop with your sales team. And so as you've got these MQAs coming in, they're feeding this dashboard, and we're going to spend more time on that. And then you're having a conversation with your sales team to create this feedback loop, and you're understanding, hey, are these good accounts? Are these the people we should be engaging with? What do you think? Whatever the case, no matter who you talk to, basically no sales guy ever just wants anonymous information. They want specific people to call. And so coming back over here in the engage category, that's where you get into more like what I'm going to call active engagement. And this is where you would find your more traditional demand gen tactics. Maybe you've got email running, maybe you've got an event, maybe you've got your SDRs running, maybe you're doing direct mail. I'm just going to put DM for direct mail. But you've got these different tactics that might be running. But as you're thinking about this, maybe your email is taking you $2 signs of effort, and maybe an event is taking you $4 signs of effort, and maybe your SDR is $3 signs of effort, and your direct mail is $2 signs of effort. Whatever the case, these tactics cost you money to fire off. Mm-hmm. But as you're firing off these tactics, these things generate scoreable activity. I'm just going to call it score, and you start driving for this threshold. And so to a degree, it becomes a function of money. At the end of the day, getting active engagement becomes a function of money, essentially, how you're allocating your resources to get known people to engage with your brand, to feed alongside your MQA data and inform your sales team. The difference is this passive engagement up here costs $1 sign, generally speaking. Yep. To engage an account, to engage the target roles at the target account anonymously, costs a lot less money than the other tactics, generally speaking, particularly at scale. And so as you're trying to drive this threshold of engagement and you're working against this function of money and you only have so many dollars, what you will find is that if you can get them over a threshold of engagement passively before you fire other tactics off, you will find that you spend less money, back to that cost per acquisition, and you will pull them in faster, and you'll do a better job of prioritizing as you're doing that. So the rest of this conversation is kind of illustrating how that gets done. Matt, you look like you wanted to say something though, so feel free to jump in.
I mean, I definitely am jumping on the passive engagement part of this. You know, I'm looking at, you know, what tools could you use to get passive engagement? I know LinkedIn ads obviously is a big one. They have the demographics feature within that platform. You can see very plainly, okay, what companies am I appearing in front of? What are the job titles? What counties are they in or states are they in? You could triage all that data to figure out kind of, you know, who within your target profile may be the person that you'd want to get in the more active engagement with a direct sales nav message, or to invite to an event or something of that nature. I know, like, we talked about using ad tech. I don't, for those who maybe don't have or cannot afford ad tech necessarily for like, or ABM tech necessarily, like using the ad tech platforms, especially tools like LinkedIn, you're able to pull really good data out of that and kind of see who you're targeting and get in front of them. And so it's a really good feature using that demographics tool a lot. I'm wondering about how you refine the score for yourself. So, I mean, I'm sure that's something that gets sort of iterated upon over time as you sort of fine tune that. I'm wondering sort of what that timeline looks like and kind of how you go about fine tuning that score to make sure that what sales is getting active on is, you know, is definitely very, very warm to hot for them.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me add some color to what you just said also, and then
Sure.
come back to the score thing. So tactically, if you don't have any budget at all, tactically what you can start doing is when you're running your other tactics, email, or maybe you're doing a webinar, whatever you're doing, if you just apply this ICP thinking against at least one of the segments that you're inviting to the webinar or sending the email to, and just measure the difference in how did my ICP perform versus anybody else on the list. Even just doing that, which costs you nothing but your time, can start to get you some interesting information, because you can go back to your sales team or your stakeholder or whoever you're trying to get your budget from and say, hey, look, these 100 accounts engaged like this, and we got this lift when we did this thing. And they're like, oh, well, you should have these 100 accounts, not those 100 accounts. And then the conversation is shifting because you have some actual data. So other things to think about on that is, if you don't have CRM, so some other things to think about on that is using tools like Lead Feeder, Kickfire, where you can understand who's on your website. So if you're running a ABM a traditional inbound or demand gen, even just knowing who's on your website and feeding that data can be helpful. And then lastly, like a lower cost tactic to fit on the back of this, if you're targeting certain accounts with certain pages, is to try to fold on some retargeting on the back of it. It's not exactly a perfect fit, but retargeting is relatively cheap, and you can segment your audience based on the pages of content they're looking at. And it can start to get you, especially when combined with something like Lead Feeder or Kickfire or something where you're looking at who's been on the site, it can start to get you some more information on the accounts. If you don't have CRM at all, let me address that as we get into it, because I think some of that will shake out. And so to answer your question on the scoring, this is coming down to, what are you doing with the score? What does prioritization mean? And so let me answer that in the context of scoring. And so you're engaging these people with these tactics, whatever they are, and they're earning points for whatever they did. They opened the email, they visited a page, they downloaded a thing, they visited an event, whatever they did, they're earning points. But also you can earn points for they searched on an intent topic, or their account saw ads, or their account had web activity. It doesn't have to be the specific individual, in the context of trying to set priority, basically putting fish into this MQA pond and then setting priority on which one you want to get. And so as you start thinking about applying scoring to this, you're basically looking for any data that you can get your hands on that is going to say, call this one, not that one. And it can be analytics on your site. It can be raw account data. It could be fit data. It could be whatever it is to feed that. And so as you're doing that and you're setting that priority, you get into this idea of FIRE. And this is what I wanted to take it to. And FIRE, which I did not make up, stands for fit, intent, recency, and engagement. And in a perfect world, as you're doing your scoring, you're trying to understand, how well does this account fit my ICP? Could be firmographics, could be some other thing that you know about that account, could even be fit against the role, the persona or the title, but fit. So if you're thinking about building a scoring model and evolving a scoring model, fitting into that scoring model fit by way of trying to prioritize the MQA pool and even get people into the MQA pool, that's one piece of the puzzle. The second is intent. Do these accounts, are they in market? Are they expressing some level of intent? And you can break that down in two ways. You can use third-party intent data providers like Bombora or ZoomInfo or something like that, where they're basically, to make this simple, companies are indexing the target accounts that you're after, and they're telling you what they're searching for. I'm simplifying, and you can understand from what that account is searching for that they have intent. But also just looking at your own data. This person or this account was on this page of the website or visited this content or whatever the case. So trying to interpret intent signals, maybe they visit a pricing page or maybe they visit the employment page, and but however, if you're thinking about intent alongside how you might be prioritizing, that's another component. Then thinking about recency, when did that engagement happen? Was it today? Was it 5 minutes ago? Was it in the last 90 days? And how do you want recency to affect that? Do you want points to go down over time because it's been 90 days or 180 days? Like, it's surprising how many times I run into a scoring model where there's no subtraction of points.
Right.
So that happens. And then engagements, like what specifically did they engage with? And so that as you are maturing that model, what I would say is on day one, try to get something in each category. And as you're evolving your program and how you might be prioritizing, evolving against this kind of criteria, not only in what data you have available to score on, but how you might be collecting it, what tactics you might be running, how that model's even built. But in the beginning, having something that's just allowing you to flag based on some criteria like this one should have higher priority than that one, is an important step. And to kind of illustrate that a little bit further, you get into this idea of tiering, and I'm just going to do this really quickly: tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And as you're thinking about traditional demand gen, a lot of people will jump to something like, oh, well, tier 1 is clearly my key account list, or whatever the case. That's where people's minds go. But I would tell you to think about it in terms of resource allocation. On these accounts, I'm going to spend the most time and energy and money, a little bit less and a little bit less. And so if you had to cherry pick who's going to get the most money, you maybe of that 500, you've got 50 here and you've got 200 here and maybe 250 over here. And what you're saying is, for these guys, this is where my BDR is going to engage. Or really typically this is where my BDR is going to engage, and you're going to pull them through and win. But you may have other tactics or other ad spend or other events or send DOSO direct mail or whatever you're doing. And the question is, well, which accounts should be the 50 accounts that are getting that? And that's where you start thinking about this fire model as best as possible. How can I cherry pick the best 50? Should it be 50 or 100 or 200? Well, that, not to get too far into the weeds, really comes down to how much time do you have to work an account, and there's some pretty good benchmarks out there from people like Topo that will help you answer that question. But ultimately, your BDRs or your sales team can only work so many people at a time. So it's a little bit of a resource thing. So as you win people out, maybe you close 10, then you're having to make this decision of, well, which 10 do I move over from tier 2 or tier 3 or whatever. So some people will look at this on I have one account that looks at on a 7-day basis. Sometimes it's a 30-day basis. Sometimes it's a 90-day basis. But the important point is, not all accounts are equal. If you're trying to decide, well, which one is better than the other, thinking about it in the context of something like fire can help you do that smarter, and recognizing that if there are 1,000 accounts or 500 accounts, you probably want them in your email nurture, or in your always on ad cover, or in your general retargeting. Like, you want some money against them, because who knows when they're going to enter market. But as long as you're able to track against something like fire, you can have a sense for who should be the 50 right now. And then you can kind of evolve how frequently you move them in and out. So go ahead.
I had a quick question going back to that engaged part of it, and specifically the advertising and content that you should be delivering to those sorts of people at that stage. What in your experience have you found to be the most beneficial? I've seen people just do simple top funnel. I've seen people move to case studies. I've seen people run them to deep industry pages. I've seen others make specific landing pages for certain accounts that they wanted to make sure that were big enough that they could go after. Like,
Yeah,
what's a good starting route to go in that kind of passive engagement track?
yeah, that's a great question. I will say there are a lot of opinions on this, and this is just my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah.
But I would say that, and this comes up a little bit later in the model, but I'm going to jump to it now. One of your biggest costs, particularly if you're a smaller team, in running a program is your content creation,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if you want good content. And and I mean, I've seen this run the gamut from 6 figures of content for a program to 4 figures of content to run a program. But it runs the gamut. But content is expensive, and no matter how you look at it, even if you're writing it yourself and you're building it all yourself, that's still your time.
Time's
It's still
expensive. Yeah.
so content is expensive. And so the question is taking advantage of ABM and being as relevant as possible. How do you balance relevancy with impact? That's how I think about that content. And this isn't something that I prepared for this, but for a quick conversation,
Sure,
this
no,
is
go
probably
for it.
nothing new to you guys. I tend to think about it as awareness, education, preference, intent, and purchase. And I know there's lots of different models out there for the buyer journey, and everybody's got their favorite, but just for the sake of this conversation, I tend to think about it like this. And so in the beginning, you're trying to create awareness at an account. And my main rule of thumb is you have to assume you have 30 to 60 seconds of their time. So what is the most important thing you need to say in 30 to 60 seconds? And a lot of people want to run with 5 minutes of content or 7 minutes of content. And you have to understand people are just not going to spend 3 minutes or 5 minutes at awareness stage. So that first touch or that first ad or that thing you're running on LinkedIn for the first time, keeping in mind that you've got 30 or 60 seconds to grab their attention. And as you progress them through, and this is just how I think about it, maybe you've got 2 or 3 minutes, and then maybe you've got 3 or 5 minutes, and then maybe you've got 5+ minutes. But a lot of people want to try to answer all 5 minutes in the first touch.
Right.
And it's cool if you design 5 minutes of content in one step and just split it 5 ways. But you just have to understand that they're just not going to spend 5 minutes on your first touch content. Or if it takes 5 minutes to get your point across, you're probably going to lose people along the way. And so typically, to try to answer that question, I am usually saying, all right, not only do I want to know my ICP for target accounts, I also want to know my personas that I want to hit. And generally speaking, I will architect a program to get, let's say there's 3 in the buying center that you want to get. Let's say there's purchasing, there's engineering, and then there's, I don't know, IT. I'm just making this up. I will typically say, where's the biggest gap? Like if sales is excellent at hitting engineering, and they just cannot get purchasing. They just can't get purchasing. That might be where you start. Don't take that too seriously because it depends on your business. But what I will tell you is that if you can get a program launched, keeping in mind you've got 30, 60 seconds, you cannot say what you need to say to purchasing and engineering and IT all combined in one place in 30 to 60 seconds. So I will typically advise to pick one to start out with. And that doesn't mean don't do the other 3. But that also means don't wait to launch your campaign until you have the other 3 done, particularly if you don't have money. So if you pick the most important persona, either in terms of buying decision power or problems with the sales team or whatever, and pull them in on that way, and then pull them down like that, you can get the program started and start collecting the data and start having context. And then once you have data on, hey, these roles at these accounts are engaging, pulling them through. And so, like, to answer the question on what kind of content, it's really loaded, and there's a lot of different things that come into that. But a thing to keep in mind is that as you're trying to create awareness, you're trying to plug into the problems that they have or the needs that they have. Then you're trying to educate around them, and then you're trying to build preference for your brand or your solution, and then eventually convert them into the funnel. And so as you're doing that, you only have so much time. And so the other half of the equation is back to impact on the business versus basically relevancy.
Yeah.
is what you're trying to get to. And what I mean by impact on the business, and I promise I can write, is if you only have so much money, then you only have so much money. It just is what it is. Like you got to work within that. But keeping in mind general rules of thumb on the amount of time, and keeping in mind that it is better to have a more impactful outreach against one of these role types than a generic one across all of them in terms of just getting people to engage and pull through, because nothing is going to get you more budget than success, and
Yeah.
nothing's going to get you more budget faster than success. So if you can, even if against that 500 accounts, you can only get 50 or 100 of them because you're focused on engineering and not IT or whatever, you at least have the ball started. Because if
Mhm.
you start too generic, you lose out on a lot of the opportunity that ABM brings your way.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to add to that. I think the smaller the budget, the smaller the more narrow your focus has to be across the companies that you target and who you target. You're just going to need that money to stretch farther for you across those people. So having a good idea of your ICP obviously is important. If you could go back to that, the page on the framework for the time versus the kind of stage. I like this visual because it actually kind of clarifies a little bit maybe the channels that you would use to go after for each of these people. Looking at awareness, you're looking probably at paid ads like on LinkedIn or something, and you have to optimize content for that channel. 30 to 60 seconds, you're probably looking at most of the consumption to be on mobile device. So you want to make sure that your content's optimized for that. Education, maybe you're looking at more like retargeting. Preference, maybe look at more towards like email. Intent, more direct outreach. And purchase, obviously more towards a book meeting. But just looking at kind of the time to the stage there, I think the channels that you're looking at have some impact certainly on where you're going after them, and the kind of time you can expect them to spend vis-a-vis that channel.
Yeah, and I have a slide and two slides that lays out a potential playbook that kind of answers that as well. But that's a really great call out. And I do have a guide that's from Terminus on basically how to map and what kind of content fits in these different sections. And I can shoot over to you, Matt, if you want to supply it out. But
Yeah, for sure. I'll give it to them.
not to show my bias too much for Terminus. But anyway, so I'm gonna blitz this a little bit so we have some more time. So a couple things I wanted to touch on before last. I didn't get the whole thing done, but a couple things I want to add to it before we move on is one, don't underestimate the value of something I refer to as visibility. And I promise I can write. I can't write and talk at one time. Visibility, and basically you're moving from X to Y. And one of the kind of the aha moments that I had when I was first doing this was like on day one of your program for your target accounts, also measure how many contacts do I have in total or leads that map back to that account, and then grow that number. And it can't be just anything, like it can't be like random contacts. But if you have got multiple roles in the buying center or multiple decision makers or whatever, measure on day one how many contacts do I have that map to my account, and set a goal. I need to get an average of 2 or an average of 5 or an average of 9 or whatever that is, and measure from day one from X to Y. Because if you don't have contacts, you can't launch tactics. And also a great from some of that ad targeting, like LinkedIn, for example, even if you go buy a list of contacts, like buying a list of contacts is not inherently bad. It's what you do with that list of contacts. Now, obviously, if you're in Europe, you can't do that. I'm not a lawyer, but even if you just have that list of contacts, it can be super helpful to even understand how your target account words the job title, which you can get from buying the contact, or loading that set of contacts up into LinkedIn for targeted advertising, or using it on something like Terminus, or even just informing, if I thought that, persona A was important, but actually after buying this list for $500, I found out all of my accounts have this title, not that title, and maybe I should build. So this concept of visibility and thinking about the number of people and the number of roles that you have visibility into at that account. And another way I sometimes think about it is access points into the organization. But whatever that is, setting a target within the context of targets, setting a target around visibility and growing from X to Y is super important to include in your overall thinking, because that is what's going to fuel the rest of so much of what else you do. And starting with that is very informative in the process, and it doesn't have to be crazy expensive. Like There are tools like even Sales Navigator for $50 a month on LinkedIn can get you a good set of insight into thinking about that. So I wanted to hit that, and then only because I want to save some time. The last thing I wanted to say about this, and we're just a little short on time, is a lot of this what I talk about of measuring this and growing the passive engagement, doing your scoring and sorting out your fire intent, your fit intent recency, and kind of when do you fire these things off. The good news is a lot of the tech that exists out there as you mature the program exists to automate this or to make it much simpler to scale. But you don't have to have that tech to get started. I would just say as you're getting started, it's about getting the data to understand things like fit, intent, recency, engagement, to understand how should I prioritize and what happened when I prioritize, so that you can start to build a business case around the technology that you might need to go build that program. So I'm going to flip over to the slides though, because I had a couple more on here that I wanted to speak to, and then I'll stop. So, a simple playbook to start. I made this really simple, and then I got another slide, a Gantt chart. But to your point, Matt, you're talking about it kind of lends itself to certain channels. What I am typically doing, this is not the only way to do it, there's many ways to think about it, is you might run some advertising on the front end where you're doing some account-based ads. Maybe you're running some retargeting. Maybe you're doing some LinkedIn. Maybe you've got some one-to-one content that you're putting out. But you're running these ads out, and ultimately you're trying to get these people at these accounts to see these ads and visit these pages. And as they're visiting these pages, if you're running something like Lead Feeder or Kickfire or Terminus or something where you can track or lead forensics, there's lots of different ones out there to understand who's visiting that page. And then from that, you can retarget those people with educational content. You nailed that, Matt. That's exactly what we do is educational content, but also start dropping these people into email nurtures because you now have some insight into what did they care about based on what ad they clicked on or what content they visited or whatever the case. To start pulling those people through. And as you're pulling those through against retargeting or multi-touch email, then you start to create that pool of MQAs that you want your BDRs to start engaging with. And then your BDRs are building these sequences that might, or your sales team or whoever, of going out and engaging those contacts. So to kind of see that another way, I want to start a little bit simple. A program might look something like this. For your understanding what vertical am I going to target, what personas am I going to target, what positioning am I going to come up with, what's my ideal customer profile. That might end with an alignment meeting between sales and marketing and customer success and whoever, like, hey, do we all agree that this is who I want to go target?
It might end with an alignment meeting.
Yeah. So I would definitely agree having an alignment meeting in there, and then you can start with an alignment meeting. And I agree, if you can start with an alignment meeting, you should. But I have found that if you show up with no direction on what you want to do, it can be a mess of a conversation with your sales partners. Whereas if you put some thought into it before you show up and tell them, here's what I'm thinking, at least they can tell you where you're wrong. In fact, the more combative time that I've been after it, I show up to the meeting to ask them, tell me where I'm wrong, because it just makes the conversation more productive. Right. But then you move into your content, you can see where your contact research is kind of ongoing. You're setting up your technology or whatever, you're doing your content creation, and then you might be launching programmatic display, email, outbound calling, retargeting, intent advertising, whatever you might be doing. So as a general look at what it might take to unfold a program, something like that is how I think about that. So so I'm happy to pause there. I have one more slide that shows a dashboard, but I don't know, Matt, if you want to.
I want to throw, if you go back to the last slide, I have one point that I want to clarify and make, because actually it kind of touches on a webinar that we did last month. And so if anyone was part of our sales enablement webinar with Natalie on that SDR sequence, when you're going through all your activities on that SDR sequence, that's when a lot of your sales enablement stuff kind of gets activated for your sales team to use. So if you want to take the elements of what we talked about last month with Natalie about getting sales enablement set up for your team, that's a perfect use case to utilize right when you get into that multi-touch engaged contact area of your ABM playbook when you kind of get started, just arming them with those sequences of things to do for touch points, things to say, additional pieces of content to share as leave behinds, ways to move them to that next stage. So really good information there that you can use to help inform sort of the last part of the playbook here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the last slide I've got is how might you measure this? And this is probably going to be an eye chart for a lot of people because it's no context. But to give you a sense of how we might measure something like this, and just as a place to start, you've got your target accounts that you're after. Let's say there's 912 of them, and you're splitting them into different verticals or personas or however you think about splitting them. And you've got these target accounts that are out there. Then you might want to know, well, of all those accounts I have, how many of them have contacts? How many of them have contacts in the CRM? And I know there's a comment about CRM. I haven't got to that. But how many of them have, and then how many contacts that you have? And right out the gate, you should have a set of measures around who are my target accounts? Do I have a definitive list? Do I have easy access to that? Is it very visible? Who do I know at those accounts? And how many do I know? And am I growing that number over time? On the back of that, then you might be running some ads against those accounts. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. And you're measuring, well, which accounts have seen the ads? And you might be able to measure that instead of, if you're not using ad tech like Terminus, maybe you're measuring off of ad engagement data or site visitor data or something like that. But how many ads and how many are seeing them, and how many, and then we're also usually looking at email. How many of them are engaged in these email drifts, and how many emails, and all that basically shakes out how many marketing qualified accounts do I have? How many? Yeah, this is a Salesforce dashboard. Good call out. How many marketing qualified accounts do I have that have shaken out from these contacts or these contacts at these accounts, with these tactics that might be engaging them? And from that pond of MQAs that I'm fishing, which ones have the BDRs engaged? Where have those sequences started, and how many people have they started those sequences? And how many touch points have we had against those people at those accounts? And at the end of the day, how many opportunities shook out from it? So like this is one snapshot at how you might measure this. And we didn't have a lot of time to get into more detail, but I wanted to at least leave you with some thoughts on what you would measure. And so each of these have a different goal. Do I know who my accounts are? Do I have access to those accounts? Am I getting my message in front of those accounts? Am I getting scoreable activity back? Am I then taking that scoreable activity and actioning it with the sales team? And how many people and which people are getting actioned by the sales team? And what are those touches? Maybe you don't have that, maybe you do. And then what happened at the end of the day after I got that action by the sales team? So that's how one way you might look at that. But I know we're short on time, so I'm gonna stop there and see, Matt, if there's anything you want me to speak to while we got a couple minutes left.
So got really good feedback on the webinar. Just the info is just great. I'm getting a lot of like, man, there's so much. I need to rewatch this and just take better notes. I will get all of you the recording tomorrow with this slide deck for sure. I really want, if anyone here has any questions, I know that Daniel covered a lot. He covered even more with me when I did the call with him before, but if y'all have any questions, man, please drop them like right here. We got a couple minutes and I'd be happy to field any. I know I was trying to get some during the course of the webinar. I had a couple drop in, but yeah, if y'all have anything, just drop them in. I'm not seeing anything come up right now, but if you guys do have any kind of follow-up questions that you want to ask, Daniel, how can people get in touch with you, by the way, if they wanted to connect with you or just kind of follow maybe your ticks on ABM, maybe LinkedIn, or if you have an email?
Yeah, definitely hit me on LinkedIn. I love sharing this kind of stuff. I'd be happy to chat with you. If you saw something here and you're like, hey, we'll go one click deeper, chances are I probably already have that in a slide deck somewhere. So let me know, and I'm happy to do that. Minimum headcount needed on marketing to run ABM one vertical. Well, that balances with how much budget you have as well. But I will say that when I did this for a startup called Canonic for a few years, I was the only one on the team. I will say that my secret weapon is I also offshored some work to a partner in India to do some grunt work for me, and it was super helpful. So it wasn't really just me. I had an offshore resource, but I did do it by myself for 3 years. So it can be done with one. I will say that usually, I think Serious Decisions did a study and said it takes an average of 3. Is what Serious Decisions said, but it can be done with one. To comment on the CRM though, I wanted to address that. Like HubSpot has a free CRM. Salesforce is only like $60 a month or something if you just have one license. If you have a business and you don't have a CRM, highly recommend just putting something in, even if it's a free HubSpot or a basic Salesforce, to start collecting the data. I know that's a loaded answer, but having a CRM is the kind of thing that pays dividends the longer you have it, and I highly recommend doing it.
Craig got a question here.
Should we talk about account person metrics? Groups or interests? It's getting a little creepy. So
it's very creepy, Craig. Just kidding.
We talking take into account more personal metrics when thinking about how person. So yes and no. It kind of depends on how. So there's basically two models. There's the model where you have lots of accounts and you're trying to sift to the accounts that are the best fit to close right now. And then there's the model where there's only 50 accounts in the world that ever are going to matter to your business, and you need to close as many of those 50 as possible. If you're in the model where there's 10,000 accounts and you just want the best fit today, my personal opinion is that you don't need to take it to one-to-one. Taking it to one-to-one and getting to that level of personalization is a very heavy lift at scale. And my experience has been that the juice is not worth the squeeze. But if you've got 50 accounts in the world, I had one campaign we ran where there's 16 accounts. There's only 16 accounts in the whole world that matter. We need to win as many of those accounts as possible. But then going one-to-one is a whole nother game, because really it goes back to balancing relevancy with impact. That's what it goes back to. And so if you need a more relevant message to get that impact, then you need a more relevant message. So balancing, so I definitely agree. The blend between the two is if you can only run a generic ABM program, but can run a personalized SDR outreach, that is a great blend. And you can build a sequence around an SDR sequence around personalization that allows you to apply some of that personal outreach and personal knowledge on whoever you're reaching out to at the SDR level, while still running your ABM play at scale with a more one-to-few type approach. So that is a good kind of hybrid. So I know we didn't really get a chance to really answer that, but that's one way to think about it.
I had a quick question. You said you were an ABM team of one and you were just running ABM. If you're a marketing team of one and you're going to run ABM, that's your full-time strategy, right? You're not running demand gen on top of that. You just don't have the bandwidth, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Well, in that scenario, we had no prior marketing. We had no CRM. We had no marketing automation when I started. We had nothing. So we put that stuff in, but we had nothing. So if you have to start generating demand today and you have nothing, we went all in on ABM.
I had a couple other questions for you about ABM real quick, because I've thought about this. I've talked to other people about it as well. Account-based marketing, would you recommend it if you sell through a dealer or a distribution network to agents?
Okay, so I've been down that road. It is a great tool to target your own dealers and distributors. Particularly if you have like new product introduction or advocacy or whatever. So don't forget to target your own channel partners to get pull through and mind share with your own channel partners. Phenomenal play there. I have run ABM with channel partners in the mix, where it really comes down to what's that dynamic with your channel partner and how do you have a process to hand out leads and stuff like that. And that is like, we could probably have a whole session on working with channel partners, to be totally honest. But I will say, I often find people forgot about marketing to their own channel and what you might be able to get from that in maybe a context, and getting mind share, particularly with like new product introduction, or getting them to do things like their certifications or open the newsletter or whatever it is that you're trying to measure on the channel side. ABM is a great tactic for that as well. But I have run ABM programs in parallel, but that really comes down to the dynamics of the channel partner.
Yeah, I think channel partners, I would also include if you sell to like integration partners, it's another form of channel partner. Integrators are a great, I think, ABM play for you if you rely on them to help you get into larger accounts. I especially think about that in the automotive sector. If you sell into automotive and a lot of things are integrated together, you look at those robot OEMs or people like that who really put large projects together for those companies, and those would be good resources to run ABM through, especially because there's only about 6, 7, 8 companies out there that are really doing that really hardcore. Looks like Craig had one more question. Do you have a general size of a group of ICPs that is best to try and target at once before it gets too large to be specific enough? So I guess, is there sort of like a ceiling for your ABM list before it's like we're really just running demand gen at this point?
Yeah, that's also a loaded question, and then I got to bounce after this one.
Sure.
A little bit comes down to how much budget you have and how much bandwidth you have. And it really comes down to how many accounts can you actually work at a given period of time. And there's a couple of different places you can look for benchmarks on that. But so all of those caveats aside, I'm trying to keep it under 2,000 accounts, generally speaking. And most of the time, a segment's shaking out somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 500 accounts most of the time. Mm-hmm. That's across maybe 50 programs that I'm running in the last year or so. Usually it's somewhere around there, but there are definitely exceptions. Like I've run programs with less than 25. I ran one with 6,000. So there are exceptions, but it comes down really resource allocation. It really comes down to all the data you're getting off the back of that program. Do you have the staff and the manpower to action that data? And if not, then you probably went too big, or if it's too general and not actionable enough, you probably went too big. That's one way to think about it.
Good. All right,
cool,
Daniel.
guys.
Appreciate your time so much. Appreciate this deck. Appreciate your expertise. Everyone who's still here, thank you all so much for sticking with us for another week. We'll get you the recording and the deck tomorrow. I will follow up with our next Industrial Marketing Live. I don't even have a topic yet. I'm still figuring it out. But when I have it, I'll let you know. Otherwise, Daniel, thank you so much for your time. Just really appreciate getting you on here with me again to do some content. I will see you on LinkedIn. We'll get this cut up. We'll get this distributed. And just thank you again so much. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week.